This is Rydo, and we're back to another live stream of Shadowverse. Today is Friday, January 15th. We're starting at 4:20. Coincidence there. Um, yep, starting a little later. Woke up. Sleep schedule's still weird. So, yeah, that's still happening. Um, well, I guess we could just easily jump into the accountability section since not much is different. I'm still playing Fear 2. I finally gave in and looked up like a Wikipedia uh slash separate game wiki for Fear 2 and Fear to figure out why there are two Almas in the story, a younger 10-year-old Alma and an older naked 16-year-old, it turns out, Alma, and there still seems to be like no real explanation. It makes very, very little sense. Although, in fairness to Fear 2, I probably have one, maybe two levels left, and the younger girl, who I was saying was the innocence of Alma, has seemingly completely disappeared. So we only have the 16-year-old naked thing. The story is just written, frankly. Fear 2 really just redoes both storyline wise and in gameplay. It's really just taking the same hitting points, the major plot points of uh, Fear 1, and doing it all over again. Just soft rebooting the game effectively. In a worse way, because at least when you were playing as Point Man, you were one of two almost children who they put her in a coma when she was 10 because she was psychic and started a fire because Armacam was abusing her and doing horrible experiments to her. And then at some point between 10 and 16, they impregnated her twice, I believe when she was 15, then 16. Then they stole her children, and the impregnations were part of a bigger experiment to make psychic leaders to run to control the replicant soldiers, who apparently they developed these replicant soldiers perfectly without having a way to control them first. So theoretically there's like only two leaders that could possibly, guess we'll do forest craft. That should work fairly well today. um I've really been dropping the ball as far as doing these daily entries. Um, but yeah, there's just Point Man, the main character you play as in the first game, and then there's the bad guy in the first game, and those are the only two people that can even control the replicant soldiers, as far as it seems. Uh, so yeah, I finally just had to break down and say the truth of the matter is 2009, clearly there was not a mature adult in the room when they thought up the story for Fear 2, at the very least to fix the problems with Fear 1, or go back to 2006, I believe, is Fear 1, um, maybe even 2005, maybe even a little earlier than that. But had somebody at all thought to say, like, why is our major plot point, and this was said in Fear 1, that the daughter of the father, the 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 daughter of the guy in charge of Armacam, just magically has these telekinetic properties, which is weird because in Fear 2 they make it seem like she was given some kind of drugs and they were experimenting on her to give her the telekinetic properties, but I don't think that's the case. I think she had the telekinetic properties. Then they put her in a school where they were giving drugs to other kids to see if they had telekinetic properties also. Uh, but yeah, I don't know why you would experiment on your own daughter. I don't know why you would uh, write a story where the 10-year-old girl is seemingly a murderer, even before they put her in a coma, and definitely a murderer at 16. Like it's like, so it's this weird story of we're gonna abuse this girl until she's 10, then we're gonna put her in a coma and do more experiments and abuse her more, and then when she's 15 we're gonna abuse her more and effectively rape her and force her to have children, who she seemingly, as best as you can even figure for her personality, seems to actually not be happy about the babies being taken away from her, and then at 16 they kill her and leave her in this amniotic fluid sensory deprivation tank for another 10 years, and then it's when she's affected, her spirit is effectively chronologically 26 years old. That's the Alma that gets freed in the first game, is this spiritual 26-year-old that's really in the body of a desiccated 16-year-old who would have been in the sensory deprivation tank for 10 years or 6 years. Yeah, I guess 6 years would be the thing. Like the whole story just falls apart and is creepy. And it really would not have taken but one person to come into that story, come into that meeting room and say, hey, let's adjust these ages a little bit. If we want a creepy grudge-like girl, which is clearly part of their influence, then they should just focus with that. Like, the way they depict the young Alma is that she's in like this red dress. It's fine. It doesn't have to be that unique. That she could have been the only Alma in the story, or you could have had a creepy dead kind of zombie grudge-like character and just move the age up a little bit. Like, you could easily have said she was 18, 19, at least get over the age of consent to eliminate some of that creepiness. But they clearly had almost a fetish to not do that, because otherwise that would have happened. There needs to be much better explanation as to why all this is happening in the first place.
Continue to believe. Help me, fairies. A fitting end.
Let's go ahead and hit that.
A fitting end.
And then, since that is the story of Fear 2, because there is no Paxton Fettel, or whatever his name is, like there is in the first game. Instead, in the second game, you're just chasing after your own team members who are getting enthralled and controlled by Alma, or you're just chasing after Alma for no reason. There's a big point in the middle of the story where you have to deal with Snake Fist, this loser self-insert character that, honestly, yeah, it really gives more to the theory that the creators of this game thought they were so cool and so edgy, and maybe in 2009 they were slightly cool and edgy, but in 2021 it really is just a loser self-insert character, and he plays really no role. There was a loser hacker character that played a bigger role in the first game, and I think honestly they're literally just taking the same idea. It feels like they literally, and I'm saying literally too much now, it feels like they may have had one pitch meeting where they said, all right, let's just redo everything that was in the first game and let's make minor tweaks. There's no stories whatsoever. At a certain level, it almost seems logical that that would be the thing they would do, because of the fact that the Fear series is effectively just a multiplayer game for gamer bros. So it would make a lot of sense that they might very accurately have read the room and said, well, these gamer bros that Microsoft introduced with games like Halo don't care about the story at all, so we shouldn't care about the story. We should just have a single player story that has some fear elements, where almost certainly the multiplayer has no fear elements at all, and it's just military shooting, and it shows off the guns. It does a pretty terrible job about showing off the guns too, because one, you don't ever really get a large cache of bullets when you get a new gun, and it's often trying to have you cycle between guns. You can only hold 4, and I'm in a situation, I finally hit a situation near the end where I had 2 guns I really didn't want to use. Like, a rocket launcher isn't going to be very useful in many scenarios, because you'll just blow yourself up if it's a small closed quarters. And then the game told me to hold on to a pulse gun and use it against Alma, so I've been holding on to one of the 4 slots has been this pulse gun that has been around for half of the game, and I would be very surprised if it turns out, I wouldn't be surprised actually if it turns out that the pulse gun doesn't even work particularly effectively against Alma. They often give you like laser guns that are too slow. They've also got some sniper rifle guns that don't have enough bullets. The assault gun is kind of the only gun that is the right gun to use. Hit that. And then hit that. Why do I keep taking damage every time I attack? This doesn't feel fair.
It won't be long now.
Might as well evolve, I'm about to lose.
People are evil. Stay away.
Yeah, they put something on the field where I'm gonna lose, because the only thing I could hope to do is make them run out of cards, and them doing 2 damage to me, it's almost certainly going to stop that from happening.
Is that a human?
You're strong.
So yeah, been playing Fear 2. I may very well not get around to actually scheduling the story mode levels so that they air at the right time if I'm not careful. I want to finish Fear 2, then I'll do a little bit of scheduling, and then I need to play another horror game, at least one, for second Halloween. Then I've got several other things to schedule. But otherwise, I think that's pretty much all I've been doing. Just that and a lot of sleeping. A lot of interrupted sleeping. Where I'll sleep for a couple hours and then get woken up right in the middle of REM sleep or just after it. And it just doesn't feel like very efficient, peaceful sleep.
Ignorance will be swept away. Eat it, small fry.
There is also certainly some TV I've managed to watch. Like, I watched Captain America: The Winter Soldier. That's pretty bad. But yeah, there's man. Give me a second. I want to respond to a text. Well, I'm in the middle here. That's something I'm not going to get into. Yeah, okay, sorry about that. Literally didn't just responding to text at this point. I shouldn't do that for sure. There was this gadget at CES, a pin UV replicator. Not replicator. That would be genius and amazing if you could replicate pins or anything. It's a UV light cleaner for pins, and what you do is you take a pin from the bottom, you sign it, and then you put a pin in the slot at the top, and it runs all of the pins through a UV light to sanitize it, which is a interesting gadget. Certainly UV cures regular plastic, so apparently they're going to have to use proprietary pins, which might raise the price compared to the cheapest plastic pins you could ever find. And at a certain point you might very well just be better off still using cheap pins and letting the UV light cure it. But yeah, I definitely have seen at like doctors' offices and in schools instances where it would make a lot of sense for somebody to not want to just hand out a new pin to every single person that walked into the place, and yet they still also want to be very careful. There's also a handle that would automatically spray the handle with like alcohol after somebody touched it, which, yeah, I can see that. I can see that that there will potentially be a new generation of self-sterilizing things that are commonly touched, and that could not only help us with current we could certainly combat a lot of the sickness that way and just increase cleanliness. There is, unfortunately, a flaw that exists where some people simply just don't wash their hands properly or don't wash their hands at all, and those are the percentage of people I think that are just going to be forever lost, and there's no amount of education or persuading that can be done on them, unless we're gonna straight up just throw them in re-education classes, camps for not washing their hands, which would be kind of crazy and extreme, but heck, we might get there at some point. Or throw them in jail for not washing their hands, which that is an interesting thought, certainly, as far as why are certain things illegal versus other things. The general idea, one would assume, is that things are illegal because they possess some harm to either individuals of society or all of society, which is not always the case when you look at like the war on drugs and things like that, because that clearly was made illegal as a way of voter suppression by Ronald Reagan, and that has been pretty much undisputedly proven at this point. So at a certain point, it comes down to how dangerous is dangerous enough to potentially throw somebody in jail or fine them. Like, even I personally, as someone who tries to be incredibly clean and probably germophobic, I was just not raised in a generation where you were supposed to cough or sneeze into an elbow, so I don't have that natural instinct to do that, and that is probably much to the horror of younger generation of people who who have been taught to do that.
Stay away.
Yeah, but I suppose that
I need more cuddles.
the that has nothing to do with video games. And we do have some video game news. So, for video game streaming stuff, there's a new plugin for OBS called Transition Tables that I'm thinking about if there's a way I could integrate something like that into my workflow. I don't use a lot of transitions. When I go over to the screen peek, it's just a simple fade because that's efficient and it just saves on time. I'm not trying to do anything super fancy that blows people out of the water as far as visuals. But yeah, I could certainly see if for more direct and average Twitch streamers having more transitions specifically programmed. What Transition Tables does is it allows you to create a path from point A to point B, and in that path use a very specific transition instead of previously existing transitions where it was anything that goes to this scene should have this transition. And that's a big difference, frankly. Like, if you have a screen that says stream is starting in 5 minutes and it's just counting down, and then that goes to your regular screen where it shows your gameplay, you probably would want a different transition from that point to that point than, say, a screen that goes from your regular gameplay to showing the chat to bringing back the regular gameplay without the chat. You probably at that point don't want the same transition from chat to regular gameplay that you had from the countdown to regular gameplay. At a certain level, personally though, I don't know how much that helps anything. These are very minimal things you do to your stream to improve it, but you have to kind of have that audience, you have to kind of have that success first and foremost. It would be educational, and if it's fun to tweak your streaming settings on OBS, by all means have fun with it, but the competition is not really that high as far as the visual aesthetics for streamers. There's still a lot of fairly good streamer people that don't do anything. Like, look at Game Grumps, for example. They're just right now playing Danganronpa, which I'm spoiling that entire game by watching it, and that definitely was a game I was gonna play. But they're just putting the full screen of the gameplay on the screen with no real effects, no real anything. There's an intro that they had done before the pandemic, and they're just talking to each other through like Skype, and you're just hearing their audio. So it's exactly the same thing that I'm doing right now, and that's Game Grumps, who have millions of subscribers. And I think that's what most people want. I think it is a very different experience that you're looking for if you're looking for a Twitch streamer that's got face cam and they're playing some kind of MOBA or something that doesn't really matter. It's not the main focus of the game. And then they've, on top of having face cam, they've got half of the screen with like Twitch chat happening. Which, speaking of Twitch, that Pog emote that they said they were going to replace with a new emote every single day, they've already given up on that. Apparently there was enough controversy around that. It was a dumb offering in the first place, so there was a thought there, certainly, that they should have never made that offer, and they should have just said, hey, we're getting rid of this because the person who made this emote went on Twitter and posted, I think I saw a bunch of anti-white people rants, which, alright, fair enough. Like, but I think in their stupid concept to try and go above and beyond, they just overcommitted. And I certainly have done that in the past too, where I've gotten way too ambitious and then regretted it immediately after saying it. There definitely were a decent number of school projects where I got really, really excited and ambitious at the beginning, and then pretty immediately never put any effort into it, or never could have put enough effort into it to really accomplish what needed to be accomplished. That was certainly true in my programming classes. Like, I definitely was in a programming class where I had just kind of done all of the work for the entire semester already. It was a weird case where the teacher was probably not that good of a teacher to allow such a scenario to happen in the first place. But it did happen, and so I basically was just being given free time at that point to do whatever I wanted. And so I hyper ambitiously thought, oh, I'll see how far I can get down the path of making an operating system. And this was at a point where maybe I had had 2 years of programming of C++. C++ does not immediately go down to like assembler language, and I don't know if I even knew assembler language existed at the time. So there was, even if I had made anything that even looked like a operating system, it really wouldn't have worked like an operating system at any kind of realistic speed. Like, and things like the difference between a real-time operating system and Windows is something that I didn't even know about until like a week ago, in the sense that Windows does not, as an operating system, just let everything happen in real time. That's why you can hit Control-Alt-Delete and end the task. A real-time operating system, which is probably an operating system that would only exist for like high-level, probably quantum computer processing these days. But yeah, you wouldn't be able to interrupt things. In that case, it would just happen, or it would lock up. 4 damage. 14 or less.
I shall give birth to a new world.
Okay, what else can we do? But yeah, I got super ambitious in there. Didn't get very far, but also didn't really waste a lot of time on it at all. But had I been smarter and had I known about Linux at the time, I could have probably made a few more bits of progress there. Not to say that I could from scratch program an operating system now. At least I would know generally what to do. I would understand, okay, where these are the parts of the memory you have to address to access different parts of the equipment, and here's the concept of drivers, and here's the concept of a kernel. And once you understand all those concepts, you realize, oh, that's totally not worth programming yourself. You should just use the Linux kernel. And once you make that step, it's only another step to say, hey, what you really want to do, more than likely, is not program an operating system. You probably just want to make a custom flavor of Linux that looks the way you think it should look, or works the way you think it should work, because the deep dive of the core components is not really worth it. This would evolve this guy and then return 4 points, which wouldn't let me play this. I'll try and play this. I don't know what this is about to do.
This ends here. I've got all the magic I need. Here goes.
That was a bit of a ramble.
Lady.
I've lost you.
I watched Captain America Winter Soldier. Yeah, I don't think there's much more for me to say about that, though. I already mentioned that. It's just kind of a redundant, repetitive movie. It doesn't really do a good job of actually focusing around the Winter Soldier, nor does it do really a great job of doing anything for the Marvel Universe other than getting rid of S.H.I.E.L.D. and just kind of reintroducing Hydra, and both of those elements were fairly quickly forgotten about 2 movies later, and in favor of building up towards the Thanos arc, which they had already been hinting at from the first one. Like, the difference between a standalone Iron Man movie like Iron Man 2 and Captain America Winter Soldier is the fact that S.H.I.E.L.D's there and Captain America is dealing with Hydra, dealing with so many other people, whereas the Iron Man movies are much more of personal affairs. They're talking about bringing back the actor who played Captain America for more movies, although probably as just like cameos would be my guess. I don't think we're going to get a ton of more of Captain America movies because he's just not the greatest character to write stories about. I also watched Bleach Fade to Black, which is, I think, an anime movie I'd already seen, but there's 2 on Netflix, and I'm just trying to clear out my Netflix Netflix watch list, which is incredibly long and full of a lot of things that I ambitiously want to watch, but I never really have time for. And I'm sitting around watching Netflix instead of playing video games, which definitely goes to show that FiO2 is not really catching my attention. To the point where I've pretty much feel like I'm not going to play the DLC at this point. And that's going to kind of suck. But it's going to be really, really hard to justify playing more Fear 2 just to play the DLC. But honestly, that may only add like 5 more episodes anyway, so I might as well just buckle down and do it. There is, with DLC, an issue where if I install the game, then I have to leave the game installed to play the DLC, and I have to remind myself to play the DLC, and that just makes a mess, certainly, as far as, do I really want to wait till October to play the DLC to Fear 2, or do I want to play a completely different game in October and not touch a Fear game until a year from that point to play Fear 3? Ideally, I think I don't want to. I would like to just be done with it. Alright, well, as I am once again losing, we are not getting good experience here, which is really no surprise. Deck rebuilds. I need to start net decking more than anything, and I really just need to figure out a great way to start net decking for Shadowverse, to see what cards I have and to see what kind of deck I can play, because we're at like 80 to 90% of all my decks are just not winners. Anyways, let's start talking about video game news. We have a Tech Raptor article. Dreamers is a next-gen 3D adventure game coming this year. There was talk in the last stream of them announcing the Indiana Jones game. I could kind of see a 3D Indiana Jones game that was a point and click adventure, I don't think it would look like this. Well, first of all, I definitely would not be happy to see low polygonal images and Looney Tune sides of buildings. But also, I don't know if you're adding much to the game or anything to the game by allowing people to wander around and like get lost in an area. Like, this looks like a possibly interesting point and click adventure for a unique story. But when you have established things, established characters like Indiana Jones, it's gotta really, really look like Indiana Jones. So, which definitely does make an argument that if you give a map and maybe you can jump to the map, that's fine. But at a certain point, if you're going to have open areas, it makes it feel like you're more of this. Is this really a point and click adventure game? No, it's not. It's actually just an adventure game. I don't know what, I misread that. Yeah. If you're going to have open areas, then you have to have kind of collectibles and RPG elements. This game is weird looking. Definitely. It seems like it's kind of all over the place as far as having an adventure game in a real world environment that is both urban and more forest-like, having no face, low polygon characters. It almost feels a little bit like Psychonauts. And the name is Dreamer, so you, I guess, assume that this is a dream. Yeah, that's a weird looking game, and it was kind of a terrible comparison to Indiana Jones after I figured out more about it. Yeah. But yeah, you can definitely tell that I'm more hyped on the potential thought of an Indiana Jones game than the final product. Because it definitely does feel like half of the game has to be a visual novel style, Telltale style game. That there is just going to be a lot of conversation going up to it or not. And you can, I think, only go so far to add combat before you are doing something like the Lego Indiana Jones games did, and all the Lego games do, where they're just throwing the same enemies at you over and over again. Yeah, and that might work, but it would fall apart fairly quickly if Machine Gun Games gives you just level after level of you running around shooting people or whipping people as Indiana Jones, shooting and whipping either Soviets or Nazis. That's another point, certainly, to mention. They very intentionally moved the story up in the Crystal Skull so that you were fighting the Soviets, not the Nazis, in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And I think that was very intentionally done, because if the U.S. in its current time does have a major enemy, it would be the former USSR. So unless they're going to move the story up further and we're fighting communist Chinese people, which the timeline really wouldn't line up with that, we're almost certainly going to be fighting Soviets in a new Indiana Jones game. There is possibly a middle ground story that could be told, where Indiana Jones gets hired by the FBI or CIA of the time to go hunt down Nazis, and you're shooting a lot more people than you normally would think he would shoot, simply because this is like some secret spy mission that he was on, and he never talks about it after that point. Or if it's anything like the movie that I expect to come out, I bet it'll be Indiana Jones is fairly old, and they've kind of implied that's not the case. I think the idea is they'll have a game where Indiana Jones is young and adventurous, and then we'll see him playing the role of a very old man in the movie. They talked about on the Beastcast how they really don't feel like Harrison Ford would do a good job or care about voice acting for a video game, and I kind of agree. Like, I think he would probably phone it in, and it's fairly consistently I have said that face actors and movie actors, oops, I missed 2 hits there, are not the same as video game voice actors or animation voice actors, and they don't do as good of a job. Yeah, I feel like there should be a lot of puzzles in an Indiana Jones game. I feel like you've got to pull far away from trying to do a God of War as Indiana Jones. You could do a little bit of that, but if you're making something like Tomb Raider or Uncharted, I think you've missed the mark there. You need a lot more puzzles, a lot more archaeological things. The reboot of Tomb Raider in particular in the first game tried to be very archaeological, and you'd pick up these items that didn't really matter. But that I think was fairly abandoned in the sequel games, and it was never really embraced in the first games anyways. I want to evolve.
It won't be long now.
Hit that, and then hit that, and hit that. Let's move on with the news. Gematsu has an article here. A tower defense beat 'em up called The Last Friend launches this spring for consoles. I feel like we may at this point start to be getting announcements for games. Yeah, I think I've saw this on Steam as a game coming out as kind of a Plants vs. Zombies tower defense, line tower defense game with beat 'em up abilities, which maybe at that level you've put enough elements in your game to not have your game just immediately dismissed as a tower defense game. But otherwise it is dangerously still close to being immediately dismissed as a tower defense game. We got 30 gold last time. We get 30 gold this time. They certainly aren't rewarding me much for 5 games worth of effort, regardless of the fact that I lost all of them. And basically no rewards for this either. Alright, so come over here. Unlimited. Havencraft. Keep it interesting. Gematsu has an article here. The Otome visual novel Ephemeral Fantasy on Dark is coming to the Switch on January 21st. Otome being young maiden, meaning a visual novel that's usually a romance story surrounded by some cute anime boys. So we're getting more announcements. It's been a while since I've had to mention Otome or explain it. At a certain point, also, it gets fairly repetitive. And I've certainly seen that with like the Super Beard Bros on YouTube, where if you watch, I would say about a year's worth of content that they've made, which takes much less time than a year, you'll start to see that they have these kind of they feel like they're improv jokes, but actually they're just the same jokes being repeated over and over again, and they've been practiced and scripted. And certainly in the cult-like atmosphere of improv, that is something that they highly discourage. You also hear that on a lot of like morning talk radio and stuff, where people are doing these same bits and stealing the same ideas from everybody because they're just making so much content, and frankly they're just not naturally interesting. Which is not to say that I think I am naturally interesting by any means. It's just to say that you cannot fill that much time and that much air without being repetitive. Some people can't. I personally would kind of prefer to stay quiet, or just be awful and go and ah over trying to script something. But yeah, that I do have a slight fear that some of the times when I'm explaining like Otome, or when I'm just talking about the 100th cheap Chinese game that was listed on Steam in a week, I'm getting fairly more repetitive than even average for me, which is pretty high average anyways. Let's see.
My blade is your salvation. My power is waking. Time to dance.
If anything, I would say we're in an odd situation with Japanese games where it feels like they're announcing more games, even though it feels like Japan is really not out of the pandemic or in the mood to actually try and do business. I think there's just a lot of cases all around the world, and not specifically in Japan even, where companies are just trying to push ahead. They're just trying to push ahead. I'd also want to mention that since it's slightly video game related, it seems like there's a fairly high amount of stock manipulation going on around the price of GameStop that is in part being done through Wall Street bets on Reddit, where people are betting, and nobody should listen to them or follow them for any kind of like buying advice, because it is literally just crazy people either pretending like they're betting millions of dollars on things or actually betting millions of dollars. One hopes that these aren't actually investors with people's retirements and portfolios, but I frankly would not be surprised if it is investors gambling with people's retirement portfolios. But to me, it definitely seems like it might be a pump and dump. It might be that someone from GameStop, or someone who just owns a lot of GameStop stock, is trying to pump up the value before they sell all their shares. And there's nothing, which is often the case in shareholders and stock prices, and this is one of the best arguments that exists for there to not exist stocks at all, that they should just not exist, is that speculation creates a massive amount of difference in the valuation of a share compared to actual good business practices. Like in this instance, you can definitely see that GameStop is not getting better as a company. They're not making more money as a company. They're not doing anything that would justify their shares going up, and yet their shares are going up just because of insane either stock manipulation or insane speculation. And that probably shouldn't be the case. I don't know how you really fix that. Like, my easy solution is get rid of shareholders and get rid of shares in the first place, and all companies have to be private, and all companies can only be of a certain size, and I think that would help society way better than having people have a retirement tied to gambling, which is what the stock market is, regardless of what people want to say, instead of having retirements tied to government bonds, which is guaranteed guaranteed returns on a 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, however long the bond is, basis. You buy $100 bond at a discounted price, usually a pretty set discounted price, I think, and then it is worth $100 in 1 year, 2 year, 5 years time. And the only risk there is that if you buy a U.S. government bond and the U.S. government collapses, well, then you're in big trouble. And at that point, bullets would have been the only retirement that would have been safe. But assuming that doesn't happen, you're fairly safe with bonds. Whereas plenty of people lost entire retirements in high risky portfolios that often they don't even know were risky portfolios, or in Bernie Madoff style schemes, or other schemes like Bernie Madoff's, or other schemes that are completely different from Bernie Madoff's.
I soar the skies in the name of justice.
Anyways, that's more economics. Video games, though, we have a Tech Raptor article, Cinderella Phenomenon, Evermore review, which, interesting. This feels to me like a visual novel, and this would be, to my recollection, the first visual novel that they've ever reviewed on Tech Raptor. They did say on Tech Raptor that they were hiring more people and trying to do more things. And frankly, I'm not super surprised that a female presenting staff writer would be one that would do something like this, since this does definitely feel like an otome visual novel. Although, arguably, probably wouldn't fall into the category of an otome young maiden. Because when they say young maiden, they're talking like 14, 15, 16-year-old Japanese girls. They're not talking somebody who could be a staff writer who's probably mid-20s, early 30s. They gave it an 8.5. Wonderfully crafted follow-up to the fantastic first game. Evermore doesn't have the same emotional highs and lows, but it's still fun. Fillery goodness for those who are looking to return to the world of Cinderella Phenomenon. Prose, gorgeous visuals and music, well-rounded, fun characters, and sweet storylines. Cons, no high-stakes storylines.